way much better than I could have done. I love that story about sitting in the pulpit and your wife. I don't know. Did Apollo come to you other gentlemen in a church? Or how did you come into these roles? How did you get your start as an individual?
Okay, well, first of all, I started at the North American Aviation Division over in Los Angeles and spent a couple of years there. And then the program got defunded by the government, and so they laid all of the people off from that division. But ironically, about a month later, I got a telegram. I think people remember what a telegram is, right? I got a telegram asking if I wanted to either go to Rocketdyne Division over in Canova Park, or to, it was called at that time, Missile Division in Downey. Well, I lived in, basically I lived in South Central area, so I decided, you know, my drive to Canova Park would have been probably an hour or more, and we didn't have all the freeways. And then, of course, Downey was a lot closer. So my career started in Downey in, actually it was in 1958. And I spent 37 years with the Downey division. But my basic involvement at the beginning was working in the photographic services department, where we did all of the printing, and we did a lot of photographs and various different kinds of services that actually was the beginning of documenting the Apollo program. And in about a couple of years later, I became a photographer, and then one day I was called into the office and said, you know, they're forming this recovery team, Apollo Recovery, and we'd like you to join that team. And so I was able to be a part of that Apollo Recovery team, which in fact, it was the team that would be available every time one of the Apollos came back from the moon after splashdown, and then put on a carrier and brought eventually returned to Downey. I happened to be the first person once they opened up the hatch, and I went inside to do a photo mapping of the whole interior of all the Apollos that came back. And so I had the opportunity to cover all of those particular things that were needed for NASA's documentation. And then besides each one of those Apollo flights, the astronauts would come to Downey and perform certain kinds of exercises. And I was going to double check with Jerry, because I remember one was called C square F square. And that's when the astronauts would come in, put on their spacesuits, and actually perform certain exercises inside the Apollo capsule. And so I would cover each one of the teams that would come to Downey, and then we would photograph everything that they did. And at the end of that week, if there was about a week or so, they gave them a book of everything that they performed during that week that they were there. And I was able to do the photographs for them and got to meet all of these different astronauts at different times that they came to Downey. So that was what I actually ended up doing.
All right, we've got church and traffic.
Well, I guess I'm going to change the pace a little differently. I grew up in the 1950s. Oh, yes. Science fiction and rock and roll. But the most important part about that time was my father. He had just come back from the Second World War. And the whole generation that came back, the greatest generation, had a very specific view and outlook towards the future. And that was, we can do anything. You can do anything. I love to read books. Jules Verne was my favorite. Science fiction, Buck Rogers, Flash Gordon. These were all, they weren't dreams. These were the future. These are things that were going to happen. I always had an aptitude and a desire to do things with chemicals and materials. We used to go out and we were the original rocket boys. We built rockets. And And like you get off the shelf in the kids today, after we put a few of them through the school roof, they decided that we couldn't do that anymore. And we decided maybe we better go learn how to do it the right way. I had the benefit of attending a technical school here in Southern California, down the Technical Institute in South San Gabriel. Because of that, when I came out of school, I was already versed in metallurgy, science, technology, and I was able to get a job in the aerospace industry here in Southern California. And I had an offer from a company over in El Segundo called North American Aviation. They needed some techs to start working on a program called the X-15 rocket plane. They transitioned us from that into another experimental research aircraft called the XB-70. Both of those programs closed down in 1964, and there were many of us looking for new work. Well, the timing was perfect because Downey was hiring and ramping up for the Apollo program. Well, gee, let me see. Do I want to go to work on the Apollo and put men on the moon? Well, you didn't have to ask me twice. I was there. I started off working in the laboratories, trying to solve one of the real problems that was facing the industry at the time. It seems that there was a little problem with rockets and boosters blowing up on the launch pad. This made astronauts very nervous. So we had to find out what was happening here. And so the laboratory work that I was doing was looking at what was causing these accidents. And we found out that the majority of them were caused by contaminants that were getting into the fluid systems. So our laboratory began working on a whole new field called contamination control, discovering how contamination affected our systems and our programs. Well, as time would have it, I began working closer and closer with the engineers and solving these problems. And we began to learn what was necessary to understand about building a spacecraft that was going to be safe enough to go to the moon. I transitioned over into the engineering labs, and there it was even more intense because now we were looking at how do you take these complex systems, millions and millions of parts, working with companies that were all over the country, thousands of companies, and how do you integrate that work in such a way that you get the success that you're looking for? We were all shocked, of course, in 1967 with the Apollo 1 disaster in Florida. And it was a wake-up call for many of us. It was, maybe we better take a closer look at what we're doing and how we're doing it, and try to understand what it's going to take to get these men to the moon and get them back safely. The real message of the Apollo program was not going out and getting all the answers to everything. It was learning about how to ask the right questions. That was one of the most important. And the stories go on and on, but I think I'll turn it back over to our moderator to guide us down that path.
Well, Chuck, you shared a little bit of your origin story already, but could you go a little bit deeper into the kinds of things that you did at work? What were your main areas of focus? What kind of engineering were you working on?
Yeah, when I was in graduate school, I worked with a parachute company for a time, and so I was asked to come to North American Aviation and work on parachutes connected with aircraft and missiles and so on, which I did. And then when the Apollo program came along in 1961, since I was the only one in our North American, we had 125,000 employees, mine said parachutes on it, as if I knew something. And so I was asked to go and work that system on Apollo. And then wasn't long after that, I took over the ordnance explosive devices and then I took over the docking, and then I took over many other systems as the program went on. And I was on the program for 13 years, so I had, I was involved in many systems. I might explain that in a program like that, you set out to say, let's go to the moon. You got to design the hardware to do that. Somebody has to do the preliminary design that says, what's the concept even? How many boosters, how many stages, the whole thing. And then somebody has to do the detailed design of those defined configurations. Somebody has to do all the analysis to show that it's strong enough and it can take the heat and all of that. Other people build the hardware. Other people test the hardware. And there's mission planning. There's all kinds of support, like John talks about in photography and documentation and all of these things. So you kind of get involved in all of that stuff. But basically, I was in the design area. And we ended up, of course, mission support when they're flying the spacecraft. Since we designed the stuff, then we're supposed to know the most about our hardware. So the program goes on, way beyond the design. You're still working these various aspects.
Fantastic. So it's possible to go to a great facility like the Columbia Memorial Space Center in Downey or Smithsonian in Washington, D.C., and you can get really close to the Apollo hardware. I recommend everybody do that and do it over and over again if you haven't done it in the past. But it's impossible, I think, to go to one of those centers and get a sense for what it was like to actually be one of the humans working on that and making that all possible. My question for all of you, in any order you'd like, is what was sort of the workplace culture like? I mean, you've got a lot of people with big brains that are doing things that no one has ever done before. What's the esprit de corps? What's the sort of leadership style? What was it like when you roll into the office?
Well, for one thing, it was very different back then in terms of a working environment. Everyone that walked through the door of that plant came in with a commitment and a resolve that we were part of a team that had to make this happen. We had to meet the goals that the president had set for us. We were going to put men on the moon by the end of the decade. Roll up your sleeves and get to work. Well, just to give you a basic sense of it, the Apollo Command Module was roughly about the volume and size of a Volkswagen Beetle, or a very small SUV at best today. So you have a sense of reference there. Now imagine that, and first of all, we're going to put 3 astronauts in there, but you have to have something for them to sit on, so we're going to put couches in there. And so 3 couches, 3 astronauts. Oh, and then they're going to need all the equipment. Oh, and you're going to want to eat. So it's like packing for a road trip, a 250,000-mile road trip. Okay, so figure that out. So that was the mission goal that NASA had given us in terms of the design aspect of it. But we got to build that thing. So now you've got a shell, and I go down and I've got to go check this one compartment over here on the bottom side. And John, well, he's got a job over here. He's got to take some pictures over here on this side. And oh, he's going to check the parachutes. Can you imagine trying to get 10 or 15 people inside that little volume? They don't even have them anymore, but we used to have circuses, and there was one little exercise where a little car would come out with clowns that would just keep coming out, coming out, coming out. That's kind of what you felt like. Every day was just rife with problems to solve. Of course, engineers, that's what we do. Engineers are problem solvers, and you thrive on that environment. Yes, you didn't get up in the morning and say, oh, I gotta go to work today. Hey, I gotta go to work today. I wonder if they fixed that problem we had last night, and you get there and you've got, oh yeah, we fixed that, but we found 4 more that you gotta go solve today. That's an exhilarating environment. They referred to the Kennedy administration sometimes as Kennedy's Camelot. I refer to my experiences with the Apollo program as that was our cosmic Camelot. It was a unique time. It happened, and no, I don't think it's going to happen again.
I just like to add that, and I'm sure everyone here that's up here at the table, one of the things that would take place is that we were on call 24/7. I mean, I can remember getting calls at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, and they would say, John, you got to come in because NASA wants to close out this particular piece of the part of the Apollo, and they have to install something, but before they can install it, they need to have a photograph, so you need to come down as quickly as you can. I happen to be about 7 minutes away. I lived 7 minutes away from the division, so I was the first one they'd call. And if I couldn't, if I couldn't get up fast enough, they'd call someone else, right? But I was able to get there, and sometimes we'd have to be like in the military. You had to sit and wait until it was ready to be signed off by NASA so we could do the picture. Then we would photograph it, they would install it, then we'd have to take another photograph after installation, and then I'd either go back home or stay there for another 10 hours. So we were always on call. And so we took the pride of being involved in something, at least from my vantage point, was very special to be a part of.
I'm trying to